Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. In this video, I wanted to talk about ignorance and wisdom and what that means for how we should conduct ourselves today. I want to start off with a quote. We take a handful of sand from the endless landscape of awareness around us and call that handful of sand the world. This is by Robert Pirsig. He's an American philosopher, and he has at least two books. One of them is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and the other is Lila, the sequel to the first one. When it comes to perception, there's at least two ways that you can think of it. You can say that there's information out in the world that gets imposed on to our sense data, our sensory organs, and through chains of neural events, we're able to represent in image form that information that came from the outside world. That's kind of a realist perspective. That's also, from my understanding, a traditional or conventional way of understanding visual perception, at least until recently. And then there's a second way of trying to understand perception, and this would be a more constructivist view, particularly coming from the philosophical strand of Immanuel Kant with his a priori faculties. So in the second sense, what we do is acknowledge that there is an outside world out there, but we embody the idea that we have to interpret that information. And it's not that the information is already categorized and organized, and all we have to do is walk up to it and then we understand it in some sort of self-evident manner. Under this constructivist approach, we come and interact with the world, but we have these internal modes of organization or patterns of attention that we overlay onto the world, and it's the convergence of the world and our interpretations, our interpretive structure, that generates a perception. And so in that second way of trying to understand perception, there's a few implications. One of them, perhaps the most primary, being that it's not obvious that when we are dealing with objects in the world that we are contending with the thing in itself. So when you see a cup, or I have this little object here from my bar cart, when I see this thing, under this second theory of perception, it's not that this object is already organized with all of its information prepared for me to deal with it as a spoon or a stir or whatever this thing is. We'll call it a mixer. Really what happens is that I have knowledge that I'm born with, and I also have knowledge that I've acquired from dealing with other objects perhaps that look like this, with a certain color, with a certain shape, with a certain texture, with a certain weight. And I take all of that knowledge and project it out onto the world. Now this thing is really here, that's true, but it might be better to view it as a set of constraints that make my possible interpretations of it more or less valid. So I'm going to put this away. Why did I start talking about that? That first quote to me really captures just how ignorant we are, and also how ignorant we are of our ignorance. We believe that the world is self-evident just as it is, and that's good because we don't want to spend all of our time trying to ask the questions, is this bed actually a bed if I just want to lay in it? Is this car actually my car if I just need to get to work? And so we have these unconscious processes that enable us to navigate the world using all of these shortcuts, but it's important to know that we're constantly using a map of the world rather than dealing with the world itself. Take that object again, just for example. From the first perspective of perception, where there's just information in the world that gets imposed onto you, one of the questions we can ask is, how much information is actually in that object? I'm going to grab it again. So really, we could say that this is one part, this is one object, but we can see that it's actually kind of welded together through different kinds of materials and processes. So really, this is multiple parts. And then each of these parts has a relation to the other part that creates a whole. And also, there are many different uses that you can have with this. So I can use it to stir drinks. I can also use it to hit someone. I can throw something. I can throw it at something. I can tap it. It could be an instrument. It could be something that perhaps can hurt someone if I were to, drop it on my foot or something. So there's many uses to it. There's many details about it. It has a certain temperature right now. It has a certain luminosity, a certain viscosity, a certain height, weight, and length. And even if we go down to the microscopic level, well, this object is created by certain molecules, which is created by certain atoms, and all those atoms have different positions, and there are just so many facts related to this object. But when I perceive it, I see it as one thing. All of that to really try to dive into the idea that the world isn't self-evident to us, although we think it is. And it's good that we think it is, as long as we can accomplish our goals. However, to the degree that we can't accomplish our goals, we then have to retool our perceptions and find different patterns of attention that we can overlay onto the world to change our map, so that way we can better navigate. So we're deeply ignorant. We're infinitely ignorant, you could say. There's this famous experiment by Daniel Simons. It's called the invisible gorilla experiment. I think you can look it up on YouTube if you haven't seen it already. But for those who haven't, I'll just run through it very quickly. Imagine that you take research subjects and have them watch a video. And in the video, there are two basketball teams passing two basketballs to each other. And they're all intermingling amongst each other. And you have a team that's wearing black shirts and you have a team that's wearing white shirts. And you, as the research subject, your job is to count the number of times that the black team passes the basketball around. And so after 30 seconds, both teams are passing basketball, so you have to really focus on the black team. And at the end, the scientist will ask you, how many times did the black team pass the basketball? And you'll say 19. And he'll say, good, you got it right. And then he'll ask you, did you see the gorilla? And many people will say no. And then you rewind the tape, and lo and behold, there was actually a gorilla that walked across the visual scene, actually stood. There's many different videos of this because the research has been replicated, but the gorilla walks through the scene, stands in the middle, and then walks off the scene. And many people did not see the gorilla. It's very interesting. You would think that if the world was self-evident to us, and if we had a type of perceptual system that was passive, and all the importance and value in the world was just there, so that way when you encounter something in the world, it jumps out at you immediately, you would think you would see the gorilla. You would think that everyone would see the gorilla. But the fact that a substantial amount of people didn't see the gorilla really shifts how we have to change, how we have to think about our perception from that first way of thinking to this second way of a more constructivist, goal-oriented, embodied mode of perception. So we are ignorant creatures who don't see most of the world. I have a second quote. This is from Carl Rogers. Man's awesome scientific advances into the infinitude of space, as well as the infinitude of subatomic particles, seems most likely to lead to the total destruction of our world, unless we can make great advances in understanding and dealing with interpersonal and intergroup tensions. So Rogers in that quote was focused on generating better relationships so that we can decrease the risk of killing ourselves and destroying ourselves given our immense technological power. I'm going to abstract up a little bit from that and just say that the more powerful we become when it comes to our technology, the more important it is for us to get our morality straight. Rogers was focused on being a good person in terms of relationships. I want to focus on trying to be a good person in general. And I think a lot of that just relates to wisdom. And I think one of the first steps to acquiring wisdom to try to become a better person is to admit your infinite ignorance. I think the road to wisdom is through radical humility and understanding that The world as you see it is a map, and it's not the territory. And many people have different maps, and some maps are better than others. But your map, again, is not the real thing, and it needs to be updated. And sometimes you need a different map for a different situation because you've actually wandered into a different territory. And so this is just a reoccurring theme that I seem to encounter either online as I'm scrolling through social media, or in the jobs that I'm working currently, or in the places where I'm volunteering, or I really saw it a lot as I was getting my graduate degree in general psychology just a few months ago. We have to keep in mind that it's not obvious that we evolved to see the world in its true form, whatever that means. This is something that Donald Hoffman has spoken about. He's a cognitive scientist. He has many books. One of them is called Visual Intelligence. And he makes the argument that we evolved to see a functional world. We didn't evolve to see the world as it is. We evolved to see the world in a manner that enables us to get through it. And that doesn't mean that that's the only way to see the world. And I think the biggest takeaway from understanding all of this is that the proper stance, perhaps, when dealing with many interpersonal problems, psychological problems, work problems, is to remain in a stance of humility and understanding that there might be something that you're missing. Again, from that experiment, many people miss the gorilla. And so if something's not going well in your life, perhaps you could ask yourself, well, what's the big gorilla that I missed? I'm going to end the video there. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.